Okay, so I had a few questions that somebody needed me to go through on the review, so I just thought I would record it for everyone. So the first question was on number 3 on the review. So if I go down here to number 3, it says find the exact value of theta, and they said the cosine of theta is -1/2. And the only note that I put on here was use the unit circle. So let me show you how I would do that. So I'm looking for where cosine is -1/2. So remember, when you're looking at the unit circle, your x and your y values, this is your cosine, your x's are your cosine, and then your y's are your sine values. So when I'm looking at my actual coordinates around my unit circle, my x's are cosine, my y's are sine. So in this case, if I'm looking for where cosine is -1/2, I'm looking for what angle that's happening at. So at -1/2, I'm going to go look for that on my unit circle. So first I've got one right here. Let me get that focused. There we go. I've got one right here. I also have cosine is -1/2 right here. So that means it's happening at 120 degrees or 2 pi over 3. It's also happening at 240 degrees or 4 pi over 3. The rest of these cosine, where cosine is 1/2, it's +1/2, not -1/2. So it has to be one of those two. And this one has my answers in radians. So I'm looking for either 2 pi over 3 or 4 pi over 3. And the only option here was 2 pi over 3. So there is more than one value of it, but they're only going to give you one choice that actually works. Okay? All right, and then number 5 was the second question. So number 5 says, find y by referring to the graph of the trig function, and all they give me is this: as x approaches 0 from the left, cosecant of x approaches y. So here's what you have to do. You have to look at this trig function on a graph. So I need to be looking at the cosecant of x. So when I look over here at my reference sheet, this is your reference sheet, which I posted, but here's a paper copy of it. This is my sine graph, this is my cosine, this is my tangent, this is my cotangent. So if I flip it over, I've got cosecant and secant. So cosecant is the one I need to look at, and they said as x approaches 0 from the left. So if I'm looking at 0 right here and I'm approaching it from the left, they want to know what's happening in the graph. So in this case, if I'm going from the left, my graph is going downward down this direction. To me, that means it's going towards -infinity because there is an asymptote right here. So that means it's going to -infinity. So you're just kind of following the graph on that one. By the way, in this graph, this dotted graph in the middle there and this dotted graph here in the middle are your cosine and your sine graphs. So just be aware of that I just put those there as kind of a reference. These parabolas are your cosecant and your secant graph. Okay, the next one somebody asked a question about was number 13. So I'm going to skip over to it. Okay, so number 13, another one where I had to kind of reference a graph. It says the graph of an equation of a sine wave is shown. Find the amplitude, period, and phase shift. So the first thing I want to point out here is that it did say that this is a sine wave. I said to refer to the graphs of sine and cosine because in my answers, I had sine and cosine. And the only difference, so when I got down, once I got all of this stuff figured out, 2 of the answers could have been correct, except that one said cosine and one said sine. Well, they told me it was a sine wave, so I'm going with sine, right? But you can also tell by looking at the graphs of those which one it is. So let's start with amplitude. That should be the easy part. The highest value and the lowest value were 3 and -3, so that tells me my amplitude has to be 3. So I'm already down to a 50-50 chance. From there, like I said, these are correct. These were exactly the same on both of those answer choices. One way, again, to look at it, your period, remember, is where you start and finish. So if you go back to your sine graph, my sine graph started at 0 and it ended at 2 pi, right? So this one started here and ended here. That was my period, but it was still from negative pi over 4 up to, what would that be, 3 pi over 4, right? So that means it's still a period of pi. My phase shift was negative pi over 4 because typically in a sine graph, you're starting at 0. And this time my 0 was at negative pi over 4. So that means it was shifted over negative pi over 4. And again, it was sine, not cosine, so it was A. Okay, the last one somebody had a question about was number 20. Number 20, again, it said refer to your cosine graph this time to find the separate values of x on the interval from 0 to 4 pi that satisfied this equation. So this time they're telling me, look at your cosine graph. So here it is. And they want to know, where is cosine negative 1? So where is this graph negative 1? I'm seeing one right here. I'm seeing one right here. But they're wanting me to look from 0 up to 4 pi. So make sure you pay attention to this interval. From 0 up to 4 pi, I'm seeing a negative 1 right here at pi. And if I kept going, if I extended this graph out, it would happen again. It happens at pi, and then it's back up at positive 1 at 2 pi. So down at 3 pi, it would be down at negative 1 again. So that's pi and 3 pi were the two places where that happened. 4 pi, it would be back up at positive 1 again. So it keeps doing this same curve over and over again. Okay, hope that helps. Let me know if you guys need any other ones.